Hello everyone, welcome back to another recap of this World Chess Championship match. We just witnessed game number 10 in the 14-game match, and Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces, Jan Nepomniachtchi with the black pieces. This is, of course, directly after we have to say it, horrendous blunder, where Jan lost an entire piece in the previous game. So coming into this game with the black pieces, also sporting a deficit of 3 points in the match. Don't know whether it would be today, but he certainly has to make a move in the remaining games to try to play way more loose and likely take a lot more risk than he has been in the past in the earlier games. So let's get into today's match, but definitely for the world champion, Magnus Carlsen, he knows that at some point he can just draw the game into oblivion. And if he just draws every single game in this match, eventually he will win it. So that is definitely a strategy that's going through his head, as well as Nepo's strategy, which is take way more risks than usual. So getting into this, we see the first move of the game, e4. And this makes so much sense for a number of reasons, but I think at the forefront is definitely the fact that e4 is one of the most explored opening moves that we have in chess. And Jan has already shown that his main move against e4 in this match has been e5 and knight f6. And it's not that difficult for player number one of Magnus's caliber. Number two, player with the white pieces, who is a grandmaster at all, should be able to make a draw with the white pieces against that opening. So when I saw e4, basically the question that myself and I think everyone was asking was, are we going to see something like a Sicilian from Jan? Is that going to be brought out on move number one? Is he really going to go for it in this game? And it looks like we got our answer pretty quickly as he goes right back to his Petrov, which he's been using in this match so far. So I think this was a little bit of an indication early on that Jan wasn't necessarily too ambitious in this game. Magnus has the white pieces. You don't want to, go for something crazy, risk it all, and have nothing to show for it. So I think he probably told himself that this was the game plan coming in. Let's get a solid draw, get back on the board. At least that was my interpretation when I saw this opening. So after knight takes e5, d6, knight d3 by Magnus, he chose not to go back to f3. And I think it's because this move, knight d3, while it does have a bit of poison in it, there are some different variations here as opposed to knight f3. So there are some subtle differences, but with this move knight d3, it's also a little bit easier to sort of vacuum some pieces off the board if necessary. However, we weren't really sure if this game was going to take a more dramatic turn, even though it is a pretty tame opening. If you want the game to get wild and you want to take risks, you certainly can do that no matter what the opening is. So knight takes e4, of course. Black has to regain his pawn. Queen e2, which will always generally force the move queen to e7. And now you can already see the queen trade being set up here that Magnus would be happy to take. And the main purpose of putting the knight to d3 is to swing it to the f4 square. So from f4, we're threatening to go into d5. So the knight drops back to f6, and we already have this queen trade in front of us. If you don't play knight f6, let's say you played the move knight c6, knight d5. These are sort of the tricky lines that I was talking about. And after knight d5, if the queen moves anywhere like this and keeps guarding the knight, then you're dropping your c6 pawn. And of course, you also have, queen d8 dropping the knight. That's the bare bones. But if you look at something like queen e5, knight c7, king d8, knight takes rook, then you also realize, hang on a sec, knight d4 from black. And who's the one that actually came up with the tactic there? Because this move knight d4, all of a sudden black's actually winning. So there is quite a bit of poison to the move knight c6 here. Knight d5 as well. Instead of moving the queen, black can play knight d4, and a line which Fabiano was showcasing during his live commentary, which I frequently tuned into, was that, and obviously he had prepared this quite a lot for the match against Magnus. So Fabi, definitely a leading expert in this particular Petrov, that after the move Queen C4, which basically appears to be winning, hitting the queen and hitting the pawn, because if the knight does a discovered check, you're just going to take the queen. But the particular discovered check that is quite lethal is knight C3, so that when you take the queen, there's knight C2, checkmate, pretty, and look at that. So, wasn't selected, move knight C6, just knight F6, a lot more of a tame reply, but just letting you guys know, knight C6 is possible there, and the line's not necessarily completely dead. So D4, knight C6, and C3, and Magnus spent a long time on this move. There are other moves that certainly could be played, like bishop E3, for example, but the move C3 is solid. Look, against the knight on C6, C3, D4 pawn structure is great, if not the best. It covers all the possible squares, the real aggressive squares the knight could want to go to. These queens are still looking to be traded, and my personal opinion about this game, particular game 10, is that Magnus wanted to make a draw, and so did Jan. And if both players want to make a draw, that will be the result. That was just my feeling going into it, that I thought that Magnus with the white pieces should be able to make a draw whenever he wants to. I mean, that's definitely the case. And it gets him one step closer to winning. Just reduces the amount of games left in the match. Whereas Jan, for example, I didn't think he was going to go all out with the black pieces. I figured if he was going to do that, he's going to make a draw today, and then take his white pieces, which will come in the next game. D5, knight D2, knight D8, right? And another very interesting decision by Jan, and seemed to be more in line with what I was expecting from this game. Stuff like knight E6 might be happening soon, queen trades, pawn to C6, getting very solid there, and it definitely feels like white is slightly better, of course, when you see a move like knight D8, but nothing really to be too proud of. Knight F3, takes, and it's always a small achievement, let's say, when you make your opponent capture your queen, because look, Magnus gets to develop his bishop in stride and get castled, whereas black had to waste the move doing this. So definitely a nice thing for Magnus to have Nepo capture his queen, but as soon as we saw bishop d6, castle, I mean, you guys can sort of see the writing on the wall, right? This knight will come to e6, pawn c6, this bishop is ready to make trades as well. There's only one open file, symmetrical pawn structure. It definitely looks like the pieces are slowly getting hosed off the board here with mass exchanges. I think Magnus wanted to do that to reduce the amount of games left in the match, certainly increases winning chances. And I think Nepo was, based on the opening choice and how he's played that opening choice, I think he was kind of okay with it as well. Right, bishop d3, he's going to take the open file, immediately challenged. Knight e6, I mean, what else? You got to get the knight off the back rank if you ever want the rook to breathe. And then g3 is definitely a nice move by Magnus. It comes with a very common idea, which is to reroute the knight to g2 and then trade this bishop off for the one on d6. The reason that that's so good for white is something that I've mentioned a few times in these recaps, which is, you take a look at the pawn structure, especially the fixed pawns, the pawns that can't move. Dark square for white, light square for black, which means if the light square bishops are the ones left on the board, black's light squared bishop is going to only be able to play defense against most of the pawns in his position. White's bishop can always attack. And you're always going to be slightly better if your bishop can attack pawns and your opponent's bishop cannot attack any of yours. So a small thing, but definitely explains why Magnus wants to play knight g2 and bishop f4. He's giving his king an escape square as well, but definitely the plan is to go bishop f4. This move temporarily stops that and actually kind of has the exact same idea, knight g7 and bishop f5. We finally see the pawn structure get completely symmetrical here. G4, bishop f4, and Magnus has achieved what he wanted to do, but at the same time, it is dead even. There's no sugarcoating this. It is maybe the slightest of slight advantages for white. But black is doing something nice. He's putting a pawn fixed, as I mentioned earlier, on dark square. So that is good for the bishop situation. If, white got to put his pawns like that, then maybe he might actually start to have some issues as black. So g5, f5, I mean, just looking to really liquidate everything. And after the move h6, f4 is just a forcing continuation that, as far as I could see, forced everything off. Doesn't matter which pawns you capture here. Let's say this one was the one chosen in the game. If you capture this way, the knight captures back. You're threatening the bishop. You're also going to be basically trading everything there as well. Black remains temporarily up a pawn just for half a move. And white is going to take on h6. And let's say black takes this. Well, I wanted to make the point that, even in a position like this, white can just go collect this pawn. But, to be quite honest, there's even bishop g6. So, the second that you might even think about getting ambitious, you get punished for it with bishop g6. So that's a good reminder. But rook h6, bishop f5. And, there really isn't anything to say about this game. When someone at Magnus's level wants a draw with the white pieces, guess what? He's probably going to get it the majority of the time. And we just see the final touch here, knight e8 and rook f6 to trade the rooks with a fork. And the players agreed to a draw here on move 41. Uneventful, truly was. I don't think this is an indication that the match is just going to roll over and die. I think that the next game, Nepo was already quoted in the press conference saying that, he's still here to play. And the next game of the white pieces is clearly the one where he wants to try. So I would chalk this game up as Magnus doing business as usual. He wants to reduce the amount of games left in the match. He's up 3 points. A draw is a great result. And for Nepo, he's played 2 pretty bad games in a row. 1 horrendous game last round. It's nice to just get back, make a draw, remind yourself you can play good, high-quality chess, and play for everything in the next game when Nepo has the white pieces. So I found this draw to be relatively routine and kind of expected for the match. But I think that when Nepo has the white pieces in game 11, that's really going to get exciting. So that's all for today's recap, but stay tuned because I will be bringing the recap of game number 11 as well. And I definitely think that there's still a lot to look forward to as Nepo needs to score a win. And Magnus with the black pieces is going to be defending. So Magnus is happy with draws as much as possible. Nepo needs some wins. And I'll see you guys for the next recap.